It's Friday night. It's 5 o'clock, so you know what time it is. Another episode of Erik Wait live, and it looks like we got some of the usual suspects in the house. Mike Bennett, how you doing, sir? Michael C. 2019. Jack White was the first in tonight. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you're watching on the replay, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. So throughout this series on Highland peated Scotch whiskies, peated Highland single malt Scotch whiskies, I did a number of Highland versus Islay. Main purpose was to sort of test the waters of, can you tell the difference between if it's from Islay or whether it's from the Highland? Part of the challenge of that was a lot of the Highland peated whiskeys actually obtain their peated barley from Port Ellen, or from Islay at least, from Islay. So it wasn't always real clear. So last week and this week, I'm actually going Highland versus Highland because I'm winding down the Highland peated single malt Scotch whiskey series or semester. In fact, it'll be ending at the end of next week. And so I'm trying to figure out what do I think are the top five. So I'm doing tastings off camera as well as on camera and going head to head. But I wanted to do some of them blind that were really close in terms of their profiles. So last week we did the Glendronach and we did my brain just went blank. What the heck did we do last week? Oh, the Benriach. Sorry. The Glendronach and the Benriach, which was a really good match because they were super close in the profiles. The main difference was the Glendronach also uses some Pedro Jimenez casks. So I actually liked the Benriach more. It was a little drier, not quite as sweet. But what really made the Glendronach stand out was that little bit of Pedro Jimenez. It makes it seem like like a lighter version because the lower ABV than the Glenmorangie peated Pedro Jimenez, which I also reviewed. But it was that sort of the very distinctive dark blackberry, blueberry wine note in the mid-palate that really made it stand out. Hey, it's Whiskey Straight Out. Thank you much for tuning in, man. All the way in Ireland. Mike Meyer, thank you much for tuning in. Paul Menzick, thank you very much for tuning in. And Stephen Crabtree, thanks for tuning in. So this week, I'm doing the AnCnoc Peatheart. This is batch number 1. I think they have batch number 2 out. This is number 1. And this is the Old Ballantruan 10-year-old, the peated from Tom and Towel. This is the 10-year-old. They have a non-age statement, and I believe they have a number of different other age statements. So this is the 10-year-old. So we're going head-to-head between these two whiskeys. So in addition to going head-to-head with these two whiskeys, I want to talk a little bit more about blind tasting, objective versus subjective evaluations of whiskeys, and so forth. But for the most part, this has been a really, I don't know how it's going for you all, kind of a stressful week. And it really makes these Friday hangouts and drinking some whiskey, for me, it's just like the perfect way to end a week, right? So real busy, real stressful, kind of chill out, chat a little bit, answer questions, whatever else, and enjoy some whiskeys. Hey, Doug Christop, thank you much for tuning in. So I poured these two in these glasses, and then before I came on, I did this. Mix these around. I don't know which one they are. Oh, wow. Steve Crabtree. I think you're my very first person to join the whiskey group. Wow, cool. Thank you very much. So I added a feature to my channel, which is you can actually join and become a member at different levels. Just another way of supporting the channel, and you get some unique icons that kind of go along with it. So thank you very much. Awesome. So if you notice, I'm somewhat keeping myself distracted. So I'm talking and interacting so that I know. I'm just trying to prove, I definitely mix these around. I mixed them before I came on before I came on camera, and now I'm definitely mixing them around. All right. So these glasses, this is a set that I got as a gift from someone who's a local here and a viewer. But I also now have eight more of these. So I now have 10 of them in total. So I'll be able to do some more blind tasting, but perhaps do some more of them. This is not an advertisement. This is not an advertisement. I'm not going to get paid or endorsed, but if they happen to be watching, if they want to work out a deal, we can do something. If you want to get some of these, I don't know if it's a Glen. Oops, shit. Sorry, I didn't mean to look at it. I didn't see it, but just to remove all doubt, I actually don't know if they're actually the Glencairn brand because they weren't all that expensive. I think they were. It was under $5 a piece. I was kind of surprised by that. Plus shipping. So I ordered 8 more of them, and it came to around $100. Anyway, so I got these from Whiskey by the Glass, whiskeybytheglass.com. Again, this is not a paid endorsement. They have no idea I'm doing this. But if you're interested, Whiskey by the Glass. That's who I got this from. They would probably be a good sponsor because they're not selling whiskey, so I don't have to worry about prejudice and being bought or whatever. So it might be good someone to reach out and see if they want to sponsor my live streams. And then on the back it says Bourbon Badass, which is kind of cool. Bourbon Badass and Whiskey by the Glass. Anyway, so if you're interested in getting some, there's a place you can get them from. Again, they're not. It's not a paid endorsement. So, Steven, did I join the wrong thing? I don't know. So there's 2 ways of supporting the channel. One is the Patreon, and the other is joining YouTube. So Patreon is separate from YouTube, and then you can actually join YouTube, the YouTube group. That's a feature that came up when I hit 5,000. I think it was when I hit 5,000 subscribers, but I held off until I hit 10,000 subscribers before I added on there. All right. I think the black ones aren't crystal generally. Jack White says. Well, one way to find out. Sounds like a Glencairn. Is there homework assignments? Not yet. That's a darker. This one sounded higher. Hold on. It depends on where you're clicking on the glass. You can get a different pitch depending on where you're clicking on the glass. All right. And then, of course, I have my challenge coins on here. If you want to get one of these. I don't mean to start doing pitches for stuff, but what the hell? If you want my challenge coins, $20 through PayPal. Also, send me an email. Also, just to let me know that you bought one. I have one wrapped and ready to go to the post office. Someone who ordered them. So $20, and that no matter where you are in the world, $20 will cover postage and the cost of it. Anyway, and so include your address. All right, let's get back into enough of the sales pitch, all that crud. Let's get back into what we're getting into. All right. The smell, the aromas is absolutely fantastic. I wish I could somehow share that, but right now there's like this cloud of peated goodness floating over these whiskeys. All right, so let's take a little bit look at the profile of these 2 whiskeys. So we have the AnCnoc Peatheart, Highland single malt Scotch whiskey from Knockdhu Distillery, peated at 40 ppm, aged in ex-bourbon cask. It is non-chill filtered, has natural color, bottled at 46% alcohol by volume. This one, the money part is a little hard to compare because I could not find this in the United States, but I did have some people who commented on my video, my review, that they were able to find it in the United States. So I still can't find it online in the United States, but with postage and then tariffs and then taxes and that crud, I end up paying probably around $100. But if you can find it in the United States, you're probably going to be paying a lot less. Then we have the Old Ballantruan 10-year-old, the peated Speyside Glenlivet single malt Scotch whiskey from Untitled Distillery, 10 years, peated at 55 ppm. Now, you've probably heard me say this before. The peated is relevant to how the whiskey was made. You could actually have more intense peat on the AnCnoc Peatheart at 40 ppm than this Old Ballantruan at 55 ppm, depending on how they did the distillation, how they did the cuts, whether it was double distilled, triple distilled, aging, and so forth, because you could lose a little bit of that peat in aging. So it's not a strict barometer as to how much peat intensity you're gonna have on the actual whiskey. All right, ex-bourbon cask, non-chill filtered, natural color, 50% ABV, so it's slightly higher in ABV. I'm gonna guess it probably has more age, even though the Peatheart is a non-age statement. That's probably because it's a younger whiskey, and by memory, if I recall, at the sort of at the core, at the mid palate, it did have some youth notes to it. But they're very, very close in terms of ppms, the casking, non-chill filtered, and the ABV. They're not radically distinct. So I already reviewed the Teeling Black Pits triple distilled. If you saw my review on that one, my thing with that one is that thing could have been, in fact, it was probably originally, because the peat is from Islay, it was probably at around 55 ppm when they started, right? Particularly if they're getting from Port Ellen. And so they basically, in the triple distillation, just removed a lot of the peat character from that, which was one of my complaints. Not just because I think it should have more peat, but because the imagery of the whole thing, it acts as if it's more. It appears as if it's going to have more peat than it actually does. Rick McCory, thank you much for tuning in. Michael Gonzalez, buenas noches, buenos dias, depending on what time of day it is where you're at. Alrighty, so I want to talk a little bit more about blind tasting and evaluating whiskeys. This, what I'm going to get into is a little bit more controversial, and it's sort of in response to what I hear a lot of people say. And the only one that I know who's really talked about it at all, but not really all that in depth, and I would love to have him on here as a guest to discuss this, is Daniel Whittington. And that is the idea, the thought of objective versus subjective evaluation of a whiskey. And I mentioned just a little bit of this last week. Mike says, I think people named Michael could take over this group in a majority vote. Yeah, I got a lot of mics tonight. Excuse me. All right. So when we're talking about objective and subjective evaluation, what are we talking about? So after I got into wine, I was actually a seminary student. I was a student at Westminster Theological Seminary and went to a restaurant. In fact, it was with my brother who lives, we live here now together. We didn't live together before then. I lived down there, San Diego, went to Westminster Theological Seminary, California. And we went to a restaurant and ordering dinner. It's a real nice restaurant. Wanted to have some wine. Looked at the wine menu, didn't know Jack Diddley. I knew nothing about wine. So I made a little mental note, I should probably learn something about wine so that, if I go to a restaurant, I want to buy a bottle of wine, so I know what it is, what I'm doing, I'm purchasing, right? That was the whole intent of getting into wine. That was it. I was not planning on becoming a certified sommelier and everything else. But that's what sparked my journey. Went to the wine country with a fellow student of mine, who's a friend of mine. We went to the wine country. I fell in love with the wine country, and that was it. So after I graduated seminary, got my master's degree in theology, a few years later, I went back to college and studied enology, studied winemaking, and one of the classes was on sensory analysis. So there's different types of analysis. There's analysis in terms of just analyzing a whiskey in terms of aromas, flavors, structure. Structure would include alcohol, body, perhaps a little bit of possible tannins in there, and all that. And then there's analysis of flaws, analyzing in terms of what you would do if you're actually making the whiskey, analyzing it in order to make adjustments and so forth. I'm not going to get too technical here. But anyway, so there are different types of analysis. There's more of a technical analysis that you would do for production, and then there's analysis that you would do for sensory, for evaluation, right? For rating and stuff like that. So two different purposes, two different goals, and two different types of analysis. But in studying wine production, you had to learn both. Those sort of skills and the way of thinking I've brought over to whiskey, and over the last few years, I've been sort of rethinking, and sort of some of my old videos. I've watched some of my really old ones. Most of them I've deleted and redone. I watch them, like, I can tell I'm thinking like a person who would be evaluating wine. I've had to completely change how I think and analyze things in getting into whiskey. Even though there was a spirits part of the studying for the diploma for the Wine Spirit Educational Trust. In fact, that's how I got into whiskey. I was studying for the diploma for the Edinburgh. Excuse me. I was studying for the diploma with the Wine Spirit Educational Trust. It's a 2-year program. Part of it was on spirits. And studying for the spirits exams, you're going to get blind tasted. So I started buying, samples of rum and vodka and gin and whiskey. And that's sort of, you may have heard the story before. That's what got me into whiskey. And my original goal was to become a master of wine with the WSET diploma would be my entryway to become a master, to study to become a master of wine and go on that direction. But getting into spirits or studying for the diploma from the WSET is what changed my course direction. And so I started heading specifically into whiskey. So that being said, my point being, I know I'm sort of rambling here. When I went back to college and was taking these analytical classes, one of the instructors, in fact, he was the main instructor, talked about analyzing or evaluating the wine objectively. He kept saying objectively. Now, he never really explained what he meant by that. And I, as a theology and philosophy student, thought it was complete nonsense. How can you be completely objective in your evaluation of it due to your own prejudices, preconceived ideas, your own preferences, and I know this is getting a little heavy here, the fact that everything we see and perceive, smell, taste, hear, we interpret in light of our history, our background, the way we're raised, our culture, right? So nobody comes to anything. Again, we're going a little philosophical here. Nobody comes to anything with a blank slate. We don't come the Latin is tabula rasa. We don't come with a tabula rasa. We have preconceived ideas as to how we hear, smell, taste, and understand things. Now, we can change our perceptions. We can have certain ideas and preconceived ideas, and those can change and modify. Sometimes they call them a paradigm shift in how you understand things. But that being said, all your background, everything in your history affects how you look at things. It becomes a lens through which you look at things, interpret things, and understand things, right? So let's go Ancient Alien Astronauts. I like the show. I'm not a believer in Ancient Alien Astronauts, but I like the show. It's entertaining. You see some really cool archaeological stuff that you don't normally get to see, right? That's cool. Anyway, those guys have a particular lens through which they look at ancient archaeology, everything from the pyramids to the Ring of Brodgar on Orkney to the standing stones of Stenness to anything. Everything gets reinterpreted in light of their belief that aliens are behind everything. Everything is aliens. It must have been the aliens. In the aliens. In fact, I thought about doing a video. The mystery: who created whiskey? Who invented whiskey? I can make the argument. Charles Ashworth, thank you much for tuning. I can make the argument that aliens invented whiskey, and there are indications that aliens. I'm doing this on the fly. I'm gonna see if I can do this. That aliens, there still remains a remnant that aliens, ancient aliens, invented whiskey. I'm gonna see if I can find something an image real quick. This is crazy. I'm doing all this off the cuff because that's what I do. All right. I'm gonna look something up. This is kind of stupid doing this. Here we go. Yep, there we go. I got it. Now see if I can find the best one. Nah, I actually have a really good one on that I actually took while I was at a distillery. This is kind of crazy. All right, there we go. All right, hold on. This is gonna be funny. I'm gonna send this to myself. Hold on. Anyway, so you can sort of look at anything, and if you have a preconceived ideas of what you're expecting, then reinterpret that in light of. Come on, man. Hold on. Sorry. I shouldn't be doing this, but what the hell? Come on. Screw it. I'm not going to do it. Just Google it. I got sun coming in through the window. The aliens are coming to get me. All right. Google stainless steel mash tun or stainless steel washback. Just go into Google Images. Stainless steel washback or stainless steel mash tun from a distillery, and look at what they look like. They look like a UFO. Look at the reflux bulb on the head of a still. On some of them that are like this, they look like a UFO, look like part of a UFO. So if you have this idea that aliens, oh, they created this, they created that, these images, whether you're talking about inscriptions on the side of a rock or a stone or whatever else, then everything gets interpreted through that. All right. So they cannot now, once they've bought into this ancient alien astronaut theory, they can't look at anything without coming to the conclusion it's the aliens. They can't be objective and to the point where they can't even question their own interpretation of the facts, archaeological facts and so forth that they're looking at. So if we are so prone to interpret things in light of our preconceived ideas and in light of our culture and our history and previous experiences, how can you actually then be objective in our evaluation of a wine or whiskey? So that's a more philosophical question, and I'm just sort of scratching the surface on it, right? The second is people confuse preferences for qualitative evaluations. Preferences for qualitative evaluations. Taylor says, simply because we can't explain it, why is it the way it is? Yeah, there's a lot of things that are mysteries. Scientists aren't sure, if anything, have ever heard of pterodactyl use the bathroom because the P is silent. Ba-dum-bum. All right. I know this sounds a little crazy. I wish I could have got the image up there. I don't know. I tried to download the image. I was going to send it to my computer here, and I don't know why it didn't work. Oh, there it is. Okay, here we go. There was a delay, I guess. Why isn't it freaking showing? Wow. So now it's in my photos, but now I can't get it to show up. Maybe I'll see if I can use it. Oh, no, here we go. I'll use this one. Oh, I'm going to use one that I actually took. This is actually from a distillery I actually took. There we go. All right. So this is the one that's not out of Google. This is the one I actually took at a distillery. So give me a second here. We're going to have some fun with this. Sorry, I should have. See, when you're old, you tend to ramble, and you do things a little bit off the cuff, and what in the heck? And now it's not showing up here. I'm going to give it a minute. Things get stuck in transit. All right. So he never really explained what is objective versus subjective perceptions or evaluations. So that's what I want to get into. I know I'm sort of ran a little bit, got on a sidetrack here. Because we used to tie an onion around our belt because that was a style in those days. All right. So what are we talking about? We're talking about objective evaluations. Number one, it corresponds to what is scientifically measurable, such as congeners. Those are flavor compounds, and phenols. When we're talking about peat, we're talking about phenols derived from whiskey production process. These substances include small amounts of chemicals such as methanol and other alcohols, acetone, acetaldehyde, esters, tannins, and aldehydes. Subjective corresponds to what is personally preferable. I prefer, heavy metal over rap. I prefer Scotch over bourbon. Objective, the second one, uses aroma and flavor descriptors generally recognized by most experienced tasters such that 90% or more would recognize the identity of the whiskey simply by its verbal description. Subjective would be perception of the whiskey. One of the things regarding that's more subjective is perception of the whiskey may fluctuate depending on a taster's moods, the seasons, the setting. You're at a party, you're at a wedding, you're at home alone, and miscellaneous circumstances such as personal health. You got a cold, you got allergies, previously eaten food, etc., right? What this has to do with then, and what you have to be really, really conscientious of, yes, there are things that can influence your perception of something, right? If you didn't get enough sleep, right? Say you didn't get enough sleep, and there's a coworker or maybe one of your kids is annoying, right? You know that whining tone? Or the ex-wife? Your perception of their voice, of their inflections, everything they say is going to be affected by the fact that you didn't get enough sleep, or you're stressed, or you had a bad day previously, right? It's going to be more annoying, it's going to be louder, more acute, more all that because of previous experience. Well, the same thing goes in terms of smelling and tasting, right? If you just had a particular food, particularly if it was spicy, it's going to affect your perception. Spice tends to exaggerate alcohol, generally speaking. So if you had something really spicy and you had some high alcohol, the spice is exaggerated and the alcohol gets exaggerated. So if this is true, if all these other things can affect your perception, are you then just screwed? Can you just say, oh, well, yeah, it's all subjective. There's no point in making any sort of evaluation, no point in making any scores, no point in that because it's all subjective, right? No, you have to be self-aware of the potential influences, right? So, I mean, this whiskey teaches you things about life. I'm still wondering, what happened to the image? All right. You have to be self-aware to the circumstances in which you're in. And when you're evaluating a whiskey, my perception may be off due to this, right? So when there's that person who's really annoying, are they really that annoying? or is it you? Is it me? Yeah, they may be slightly annoying, slightly a little whining, whatever, but I have to be acknowledged, but I know I'm not feeling well. I know I'm stressed. I know I didn't get enough sleep. I know and I take that into account and how I deal with that person based on the fact that I know I didn't get enough sleep. And so I don't react according to how they're doing things because I'm self-aware and cognitive of my own situation. It's the same thing when evaluating whiskey. Is a whiskey all that annoying? Like an annoying kid, annoying wife, annoying coworker, annoying roommate, whatever? Or is it the circumstances on it? It really has to be sort of smelling and tasting then of a whiskey is not just a matter of picking it up and going. It requires some self-awareness so that when you approach it, you can sort of discount these certain circumstances, set those aside. This takes some mental discipline, by the way, and focus on the whiskey to seek to be fair, you might say, to the actual whiskey. Bubble Bath Bourbon, thank you much for tuning in. That's why I just drink Palomas or margaritas on Taco Tuesday. I don't get that one. Okay. Joey Shortprint says, what year did Skynet become self-aware? From the original Terminator? Wow, it's probably already passed. Because they were projecting decades ahead. Anyway, so in evaluating whiskeys or wines or anything else, or evaluating people and dealing with people, you have to be really, really self-aware to when you come to it. So that's number one. Be self-aware in order to evaluate a whiskey, right? Number two, and I've said this before, this is why I'm really not a fan of the wham, bam, thank you, ma'am reviewers. Not that as people, I just don't take their evaluation all that seriously. Donna Pass Whiskey. Hey, Eric, just finished AnCnoc Cutter. Oh, peated. Yesterday, should have saved it for tonight. Well, you can reflect on it on the past. I hope it was really, really good. You know, I would really like to explore AnCnoc a lot more. I haven't had that much experience. I've heard so many good things. Roy has talked about them. So I really want to explore a lot more. So you have to sort of consider your own situation and how you evaluate whiskeys. And this gets, particularly doing technical evaluations. So this was back in, so from September, September 2013 up through the end of February, going into March 2014, I was studying with 3 master sommeliers, 3 nights a week for 3 to 4 hours a night. So I would work all day, and then it was at the Culinary Institute, which that particular campus is now closed. So you're working all day long, and then you're smelling and tasting wines, and you listen to lectures and all this kind of stuff. So you're tired kind of going into it, but I really enjoyed it. Well, about halfway through the 18 weeks, you might call it a semester, I had to have some dental work done. I had a root canal, and they go, and then they take, it tastes like clove, and they stick it in there, and they take this packing. If you've ever had this done before, you know what I'm talking about. And they like stick it up in there, and then like a couple of weeks later, you got to go back, and then they put in the crown, or they put in a crown. You know what I mean? Try doing a sensory analysis of wine or whiskey or anything else while you've got that thing crammed up in there, right? And you've got, because the wadding from that they stick in there would make water seem tannic, because it would really, really dry your mouth out, right? So it dried your mouth out, which then made wine seem more tannic what it is. Now the clove character, that only was there for the day that they put in there, so that went away. But I had a real challenge with textures. So doing structure analysis of a wine, which is tannins, acidity, and body. Aromas was fine because my nose was fine, right? But it was how the wine felt. So a lower tannin wine, let's say Grenache or Pinot Noir, would seem real tannic when actually it wasn't, and the alcohol could seem exaggerated, right? So in being a more objective, it's always an attempt to be more objective in your evaluation, is being self-aware of your circumstances and your subjective tendencies for things to affect you. So that was number one. And then number two is try it on a number of different occasions. Don't base your sole judgment based on that whiskey on that particular circumstances. And there are a number of different circumstances that you can be in that will throw you off. I'm gonna take a little whiff. Hey, Kilco, thanks for tuning in, man. Jack White, thanks so much for tuning in. So I wrote on the bottom, you might have seen it for a second there, on a little piece of yellow paper, the initials for these two whiskeys, and then it's taped on the bottom. And then I, did the shell game moving around. So let me tell you some circumstances in terms of evaluating whiskeys that I highly, highly, highly recommend are not the best circumstances. I talked about last week about some of the problems of wine contests in which they have some sort of like art and wine festival, like the Lodi Art and Wine Festival. They have them in the Bay Area, in which the judges are judging like 40 or something different Zinfandels or Cabernets or whatever else, right? You get the issue of palate fatigue, right? So I mentioned that last week. I talked about that and how what happens is the wines with the higher alcohol or something more extreme is what's going to get your attention out of this ocean of wine. Well, with us in whiskey, how many of you guys, let me know, how many of you been to a whiskey event? We have the Whiskey Festival. There is the World of Whiskeys. If you've been to a whiskey event, let me know. Say right now, mention in the chat what whiskey event you've been to, and so forth. Just put it in the comment section. If you've been to a whiskey event, let me know. Just put it in the chat section. I know you guys are chatting amongst yourselves. Daniel's drinking Balcones Brujeria. Ooh, Brujeria is awesome. Jack White says, I'm toasted out in 15 minutes or so. Texas Whiskey Festival. So Jack says he's been to the Texas Whiskey Festival. I actually wanted to go to that. I should have gone because actually they had like a special chapel reserved for people who were part of the I'm getting a little bit more of a milk chocolate on this one. Get much more of a darker chocolate on this one, but they both have chocolate notes. Michael Hasser says a pool party filled with a Clan McGregor. That's a very cheap whiskey. So other than Jack, none of you guys have been to any whiskey events? You haven't been to any whiskey festivals? You haven't been to any whiskey events? So if you go to one, you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. So I've been to Whiskeys of the World for several years. And so Coco says he went to the New England Whiskey Festival in 2019. So you go to there and there might be, well, actually at the Whiskeys of the World, they had like 60 representatives, right? That's a lot of tables. Whiskey Festival, I think they had close to about 100. So you go there and there's these rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of tables, representatives pouring whiskeys. And you get a little Glencairn and you run small and taste, small and small and taste, small. And then they got music, you got going on. And people are kind of bumping elbows, and whatever else. Never been to a festival. Mike, if you ever get a chance, they have their place, they have their value. But once you've been to one or two of them, you kind of go, okay, for me anyway, it's kind of like you've been to them. I've never paid to go. They're expensive. I've never paid to go. I get invited. I get invited to go in before they open up, which is kind of nice. Mayhem Festival. I'm not sure if you're being serious or not. Daniel says, been to similar events over in Dallas, Texas, Shreveport, LA, and there were private events with different distilleries. Never been to a festival. It doesn't have to be a festival, but just a large event where they have a lot of different whiskeys. So here's the challenge when you're going there, right? One, you taste a whiskey and you taste another whiskey and you taste another whiskey and you taste another whiskey. After a few of them, you're going to be kind of happy. Two, the fact that it's a festive environment with all the music and everything else that's going on, it's a different setting. You're not sitting down. You tend to be standing around. Sometimes they give you some of the events. You have a Glencairn and you got this holder for it. So it's got like it's hanging around your neck. I would suggest go there, go to a whiskey festival, go to a whiskey tasting event, those large events, and treat it as if you're just sort of becoming aware of the producers and not making judgments on the whiskeys because of the context. A little 1 ounce pour, whatever it is they pour you at a whiskey event, and they're trying to convince you, hey, buy our stuff. They're not necessarily selling at these events. It's not the most, it's more better way to get aware of their products, get aware of what's out there than necessarily and being in a more formal sit-down event where you can sort of patiently, at your leisure, sample them. Now, last time I went to the Whiskey Festival in San Francisco, the main thing that was the highlight of the event, they had these breakout seminars. You go to a room, and Dr. Don Livermore was there from Weiser Distillery up in Canada, and got to taste 6 different whiskeys. Well, listen to his lecture. He was talking about casks and the various chemical compounds and structure that you get and taste and so forth that you get from casks and how it affects the whiskeys. It was awesome. It was awesome. It was great. And we got to taste the Lot 40 cask strength, which is not sold here for the most part here in the United States. And later I was able to get a bottle. So again, subjective versus objective. I would never go to one of those events, taste a bunch of whiskeys, and come away thinking I really understand those whiskeys at that event. That's the main thing. The withhold judgment. Yeah, I tasted it. I didn't like it, but this was the circumstance. Yeah, I tasted. I really like it, but it was a wedding. It was a party. It was my birthday, and we're having such a good time. Because what happens is, maybe you've experienced this. Let me know if you've experienced this. You ever taste something and you thought that was great, and then you bought a bottle, maybe it was even at a distillery, and then you go home and you're tasting, you're like, it doesn't taste as good here at home as it did at the event, right? What changed? Is it that you got sold a different whiskey than what they were pouring? No. More than likely, it's just your subjective emotional response to the whiskey was affected. How great you thought it was affected by the circumstances in which you are in, right? Now, again, what I'm trying to get across here versus what some other people say is, yes, there's always going to be a certain subjective element to it. But if you're self-aware and self-conscious about your circumstances, then you can kind of discount that. You can kind of put that aside. You can kind of go, okay, I'm not going to make a final judgment because of the circumstances, but I'm going in this direction in my perception and evaluation of that whiskey, but I want to try it again, right? I want to try it again in another circumstance before I make a final judgment. All right. I've been talking. I haven't been smelling or tasting. All right. Whoa. We're really into this. Now I'm wondering if that photo of the alien of the aliens ever showed up in my inbox. What the heck happened to that? Anyway. It's going to drive me crazy how this thing ain't working. And now I'm mad at myself for even goofing with this stupid thing. There we go. Here's one. Come on. No, not that one. That one. Okay, 1 done. 10 to 2. All right. Now maybe it'll show up. All right. So is there can you be 100% objective at all times? No. Are you so taken away and so prone to subjectivity that you can't make an objective evaluation? No. In order to be a good judge, good evaluator, right, good tester, examiner of a whiskey, it takes a little bit more of a discipline, a self-discipline, in how you approach and think about a whiskey. This requires time and it requires some patience. And I think I might be able to pull up that picture of the UFO, and you guys don't know what I'm talking about. If I had thought ahead, I would have done this ahead of time. All right, there we go. Here's one. I'll bring it up in just a second. Oh, there we go. And that's the one I want. All right. That's the one I want. All right, let's see if I can bring it up. Yep, that's what I want. This will work. This will work. This is actually a picture I took. There we go. Now tell me that doesn't look like a UFO. Okay, that's a UFO, man. I mean, and it's even got, you got the viewing screen there. So you got that top part. That's the exhaust pipe for the UFO that's shooting out. This is a UFO. This is evidence that ancient alien astronauts invented whiskey, right? Because you get the total image here of a UFO. All right. All right. All right. Being silly. Plains Crafter, thank you very much. Thank you very much for tuning in. And thanks for the $10. Every time a Glencairn rings, an angel gets his wings. All right. So if you took someone from ancient alien astronauts, beam me up, Scotty. Now, if you took someone from ancient alien astronauts and they didn't know what a distillery was and they didn't know what that was, and you showed them that image, I guarantee you, in a sort of a knee-jerk reaction, they're going to go, a UFO, UFO, because that's how they interpret these things. And of course, you feed into the conspiracy theories and all the rest, and on all the rest of the silliness, right? All right. So, objective is you can do it objective because objectively there are certain chemicals and aldehydes and esters that are there. They're there when I'm tasting them. They're there when you're tasting them. Objectively, we can use descriptors such that they're commonly known. Like if I say licorice, we all know what licorice is. If I say vanilla, we know what vanilla is. It's common descriptors so that when we communicate, we can know, we can independently smell and taste a whiskey and get very, 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 very close in our descriptors and come to the same conclusions as to what the whiskey smell and tastes like. Now, there is a lot of play in this, right? There is a lot of, I'm getting a little bit of mint, chocolate mint on this. This one's a little bit more dark chocolate, a little earthier, a little bit more fudge, a little bit of nuttiness. This has a little bit, I would say a little bit more oceanic character. Whew. This one smells younger, but I could be wrong. Again, wow, this one's definitely earthier. This one seems slightly younger. And I'm just going on aromas. So both have a chocolate character, but a different chocolate character. This one's darker, earthier. This one is a little bit more of a lighter chocolate. This one's more of a darker chocolate. This one is, in terms of the smoke character, a little bit more like a fire that's just gone out. This one definitely has a lot more oceanic. It has more like black licorice. Hey, Daniel, Whiskey Throttle, thank you much for tuning in, man. All right. Now, the argument goes in terms of subjectivity versus objectivity, and I've had a little bit of conversation with Daniel Whittington on this a little bit, is we can both look at something and say, this is red, but how do we know whether or not that what I see is the same thing that you see? All we do know is when we both point to those same things, we all say red, red, red. That's a whole nother discussion, and I'm not going to get into that tonight because it's not that pertinent. Now, in terms, hey, Ron Gurgley, thank you much for tuning in. All right, let's pretend we're all tasting and smelling a red wine, and we're getting a red fruit note on this, or just say whiskey. Let's not forget wine. Let's stick to whiskey. Let's say we're getting a red fruit note. Let's say it's a whiskey that was aged, spent some time in a red wine cask. There we go. Sorry, a little itch right there. Spencer Pond, thank you much for tuning in, man. Thanks for the $5 Canadian. Every time a Glencairn rings, an angel gets his wings. Appreciate your content. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much. Reality, what a concept, right, Daniel? So, all right, everybody in the chat right now, imagine you got a red wine cask finished whiskey, and you're picking up a red fruit note, but it seems slightly tart. In other words, it's not like a sugary red fruit note. It's slightly tart. Give me a red fruit, and then your descriptor here, that's slightly tart, but a red fruit note. Write it in there. Just name a fruit. Name a fruit. Name any fruit. Red fruit, slightly tart. Give me one. Come on, guys. Got to be somebody interacting here. I'm going to take a little second here. I'm going to take a slight taste. Raspberry. Taylor says raspberry. Okay, got another. Steve says raspberry. Cranberry. Ron Gertler. They with cranberry. That's excellent. Top shelf, Dustin. Hey, thanks, Dustin. I see the black shirt, black glasses, and black bottles. Well done. You know, it's funny. I didn't even think about that. I didn't even think that my shirt corresponded. Raspberries, berries. So, cranberry. Let's try here. I'll throw you one. Underripe strawberries, right? So you could have a cherry, right? You could have a cherry, maybe even more of an underripe cherry. So that you would have not only the type of red fruit, but how ripe is it? So pomegranate, excellent, Michael. Pomegranate, because regardless of the ripeness, pomegranate had that little bit of tartness and that acidity there, right? So let's say we're all tasting. Let's say everybody who just gave a descriptor. We're all sitting around, we're smelling this wine cask finished whiskey, and we're writing down our notes. And one of you says a raspberry, one of them says an underripe strawberry, someone else says cherry, someone says pomegranate. Tomato is a fruit, okay, but they're not sweet, and it's not, and they're not tart like that. All right, it's very red too. Yes, it is. Tomato. Which one of you would be right, and which one of you would be wrong? With all these different fruit characteristics, right? Red fruit characteristics. If you were being judged and being evaluated, persimmons aren't red. Persimmons are kind of orangish color. Yeah. Which would you be right? Right. Michael Gonzalez, yes. Red chili peppers. With Daniel, chili peppers are not a fruit that I know of. I don't think so. You'd all be right. So if I was the judge, right, and you have to write down your evaluation, but you would all be right because you're in the ballpark. Descriptors can be accurate. They can be objective without necessarily being 100% correct, because the odds are the aromas and flavors we use just as descriptors are not going to be exact, but they're in the ballpark. They're close enough so you know what they're talking about. If I describe a Sauvignon Blanc, right, as grapefruit, if you say a white wine, if you talk to any sommelier, name me a white wine that has grapefruit character, they're all going to say Sauvignon Blanc. There are other wines that have grapefruit character, but it's one of the most well-known. It's one of the most common descriptors of a Sauvignon Blanc, right? Same thing with, say, a red cask whiskey. Now, I could do the same thing with, we could talk caramels, dark caramels, light caramels, toffee, right? Nougat, these sort of candy characteristics. They're sort of in the same ballpark. Top Shelf Dustin says, if you had any idea of how often Mike, Keith, and I argue over which type of bubblegum we're tasting in a whiskey. Yeah, is it the kind that comes in a pack of baseball cards? You know, what kind of bubblegum is it, right? So you're all correct. You're in the area. You're in the ballpark. So a lot of descriptors in describing whiskeys are ballpark descriptors and not. So you go. So when someone says, "Oh, it's all subjective," they all describe it differently. Da, da, da. No. They're in the same neighborhood. They're close. Now, if I was smelling this and I said, you know what? I'm getting oranges. No, there's no freaking orange character on this. There's no oranges, no citrus whatsoever. And anybody, you know, if you have a room of 100 people and only one person out of 100 says oranges, and you were to say, oh, well, that's what they're getting. That's not what I'm getting. I think it's in their head, which is another problem. This is a challenge of blind tasting and the subjectivity versus objectivity. There are several rules that you keep when you're doing blind tasting, whether it's wines or whiskeys. Keep your mouth shut. Keep your freaking mouth shut, right? Until you have an open table discussion. Here's the reason why. So I was hired to be on a panel of evaluating wines for a winery. And I was there with several colleagues of mine, fellow sommeliers, and we're friends and colleagues and sommeliers. And then the guy who was running the panel, who was a manager for the winery, he put his father on the panel. I'm sure his father likes wines or whatever, but you're taking a bunch of trained sommeliers and putting this guy in there. We know how to be professional. And this guy was talking about what he was smelling and tasting when he was writing his notes. I wanted to just shut up. Why? Because we are very prone to suggestion. Excuse me. I drink some water. This is the objective or subjective. We are prone to suggestion. Man, sorry. Let's take a sip of whiskey. Wow. The other thing he did, he was wearing freaking cologne. And he had his jacket on. I'm like, dude, are you wearing cologne? Oh, yeah, with some aftershave. We're supposed to be smelling these freaking wines, not your freaking. I didn't say it. I wasn't this rude to him. I was like, we're trying to invite. So he got up, took his jacket off. I was like pissed. And I did tell this guy, hey, don't invite your dad to this event. If you want to have him taste his wines, have him taste somewhere else, right? It's nuts. Yeah. So part of the challenge is, and you can do it to yourself. Yeah, party foul. Exactly. Dude, party foul. Exactly, Dustin. To sort of maintain is, don't be chewing gum, don't be wearing cologne and perfume, you got girls, if you're wearing lipstick, anything like that. Hand lotions, right? Hand lotion, what you've been washing your hands with, right? I know we were all washing our hands and using hand sanitizers. A lot of the hand sanitizers I've been smelling smell like new make. They smell like new make, or they smell like the heads when you're doing cuts. You know, you got your hearts, you got your tails, and you get your heads. They smell like the heads coming out of a spirit bank. So not only are you prone to suggestion by someone else and what they're saying, you can screw yourself. Go screw yourself. No, you can mess up yourself if when you're evaluating, before you've fully done your full analysis, you start thinking, I think it could be this. So what happens is you start smelling something and all immediately your brain wants to jump to the conclusion before you've done your full analysis. Psychologically, there's something called, you got fast versus slow thinking. There's a whole book on this, and there's a video on this on YouTube. When you're driving down the road and someone cuts you off, you don't have time to analyze the situation like you would and you're playing a game of chess. You have to quickly decide, are you going to brake? Are you going to move to the left? Are you going to move to the right? Are you going to plow into them? Are you going to really let off on the gas and then maneuver? In a split second, you got to make these decisions. So you might, in a split second, with a corner of your eye, look in the mirrors, look to the left, right, you might make a decision, right? And of course, there's a lot of tension and adrenaline running that sort of situation. Yeah, power suggestion. That's quick. Your brain thinks like that. Slow thinking is you're playing chess and you think this move, okay, if he makes that move, I'll make this move. Then he makes that move, then I'll make this move. And there's a slow thinking out process of that. Right? When you're under stress, you're taking an exam. I know that most of you are not going to be taking exams, but when you're stressed and you're taking an exam with the Quartermaster Malaise, a WSET, or some whiskey association, or you're on YouTube and you got thousands of people watching you, right? You got thousands of people watching you, and you're doing a blind tasting in a live well, there's speed chess as well, Dustin, where you get with the clocks, you go, poof, poof, and all that. All right, that's all another chess. But when you're under stress and you're blind tasting, you don't want to make a fool out of yourself on live, which I can do even without blind tasting on live. The stress of the situation can cause your brain to want to jump to a conclusion because you want to get it right sooner than you should, before you've actually finished doing the evaluation. And if your brain jumps to what you think it is, now what happens is through the rest of your sets, what you're smelling and tasting, what you're smelling and tasting will now conform to what you first thought it was, even though those aromas and flavors aren't actually there, because you've already prejudiced yourself in your head as to what you think it is, I'm taking a sip. Let's talk. Really nice. Whatever it is, it's really nice. It's really rich. There's a little of the oceanic character. There's a little of that Sharpie black pen character to it. There's that licorice. Really, really, really dark chocolate. Slight tannin, finishes dry. It has, man, this is gonna be tough. It has real nice development. It's very rich. It's a lot of mostly dark tones, dark fruits, dark chocolate, fudge, vanilla, dark caramels. You can have like light caramels. You can have darker caramels, right? I don't know if you have See's Candy. You go to See's Candy and they add these, they're kind of like suckers, like caramel suckers. It's a hard caramel on a sucker. Buy a bunch of those and different shades of color. And those become like a palette of variations of flavors. You can use those for training your palate as a tip for you. There is a little bit of Lafroigness to it. You know what I mean? Just a little bit. Really, really nice. A really nice whiskey. It's got a real long finish. I'm picking up some chocolate and mint, like York's peppermint patty on the back end. Really, really, really nice. I like this a lot. What is the alcohol level? Probably, and so one of these is 46, and the other one's 50. So probably one of the most important things in terms of in evaluating wines, you go sugar, acid, tannin, alcohol, and body. With whiskeys, probably the key issue that in terms of structure is the alcohol content, the ABV, and that's going to be based on warmth and body, mouthfeel, and weight like that, and whatever sort of tingling and bite, tingling from the alcohol you might get. Those are going to be sort of probably like the main 3 characteristics of evaluating alcohol level. All right. You guys come up. Hey, Mike asked, like, hey, do you guys get some weird? You guys have weird comments and conversations among yourself. This one's got chocolate notes, but not as dark as this one, which is funny because I thought on the nose this smelled darker. It's hard to describe. But in the mid palate, this seems a little younger. The weight, I could be wrong because this is very close. The weight, sort of intensity and bite, seems slightly less than this one. Slightly less than this one. It's rich, but the chocolate is a little bit more towards of a milk chocolate versus a dark chocolate. It doesn't have the oceanic character that this one does. Now, peated whiskeys, I think evaluating peated whiskeys side by side, I think it's the most difficult because the peat is so penetrating into your palate that, how much of my tasting this is affected by what I just had in this, even though I drink some water. Now, what I'm doing here, for the most part, is what I want to do is, which do I prefer? Do I prefer this one or this one? Now that can change, being more subjective, that can change. One day you'll be more in a mood like this, the next day you'll be more in a mood like that, right? So I have to go back over my videos, look at the point scores, previous evaluation, and how I evaluate it now, right? And it's come to play. But these are like, this close. They're this close in terms of which one I prefer. But right now I prefer this one. It's a little bit more Islay-like. You know what I mean? A little bit more Lafroig-like. This one seems younger. This one seems slightly less ABV, just a little bit more milk chocolate. It also has a slight mint character coming on the back end. Go back to this one. Now, there are some other things that could be affecting it. How long these bottles have been open within a close period of time. This one's sharper. It's edgier. It seems a little bit more vibrant, but those characteristics can also be a sign of youth, that sort of vibrancy. Daniel says, this sultry commentary is making me sleep. Oh, okay. Lullaby and good night. Daniel's whole purpose and goal is to get me thrown off track. If you guys don't know Whiskey Throttle, his name's Daniel. He's a Canuck. All right. Which one do I prefer? It's a narrow margin. I prefer this one on my right, but it's so damn close. Which one do I think this is? I'm going to go back to the whiskey notes. Excuse me. So, the AnCnoc is 40 ppm versus the Old Ballantruan is 55 ppm. The Old Ballantruan, it's got 10 years on it. I think the AnCnoc is going to be younger. Old Ballantruan, 50 ABV. AnCnoc, 46% ABV. So a little bit more age, I think. A little bit more, potentially more ppms. Excuse me, I'm belching here. And a little higher ABV. All right. Top Shelf says, Dustin, but you can't hate Daniel's sexy wavy hair. Hey, if you got hair, it's all sexy to me. Actually, I prefer bald guys myself. Not bald women, not so much. All right. I think this is the Old Ballantruan, and I think this is the AnCnoc, and I think this is the AnCnoc. I think this is the Old Ballantruan, and I think this is the AnCnoc. Now, of course, it's 50-50, right? So even if I didn't taste it, I got a 50-50 chance of being right? So I could be wrong. I will say this one on my right is the one I prefer by a narrow margin. That's my drum roll. But I think this is the Old Ballantruan. If it's Old Ballantruan, on the bottom, it'll say OB, and the AnCnoc Peatheart. I think I put APH. APH. All right, here we go. Yep, you got it. Hold on. I don't want to spill it. Hold on. OB, Old Ballantruan. And so you can read this. APH, APH, APH. So I got it. Of course, it's not like there was 5 or 10 of them, right? And I was pulling it out. There's only 2. And so even if I, I mean, let's get real. Let's be honest here, right? What's more important is not that I got it right. It's why I got it right, right? It's not okay. Keep this in mind. It's not that I got it right. It's why I got it right. Why I got it right. For me, that's more important, right? Why? Let's go back to the original. Go back to the notes. And why did I think the difference? One, the Old Ballantruan, I could sense the age on the mid palate on the Peatheart. It's minor. It's a minor thing. It's not that big of a deal. But there was a youth note in the middle. And I mentioned in a previous live stream, if you can, get yourself some new make from a distillery, right? Get yourself some bourbon new make, get you some peated new make, get you some non-peated new make. If you ever visit distillery, whether in Scotland, Ireland, or else, get you some new make and train your palate, right? Actually, I didn't do a live stream. I did it in one of my videos. The ABV, it was minor, but you could tell the slight difference between the two. PPMs, meh. I don't know. I never in a million years, probably, if I had to guess at PPMs, I couldn't have told you. I couldn't have told you. And I don't necessarily know that was the deciding factor, and that one seemed like dark chocolate versus one seemed like a milk chocolate. It could have been a factor. It might not have. I don't know. So anyway, Dustin says, I did a blind tonight. IB Glenlivet, 12 first fill sherry, 46% Glendronach 18. It was a layup. Mouthfeel, sold it. Age was noticeable. Yeah. One being 43. Yeah. So it's the structurally paying attention to the ABV, becoming accustomed to what youth is like, right? I think those really were the deciding factors. Daniel says, "Don't lie, you use the force." Absolutely, use the force. Yeah. No, so like last week, the what really stood out was the Pedro Jimenez cask, right? And obviously, I drank Pedro Jimenez. I got a bottle of Pedro Jimenez. Sitting off here to my left. But having tasted other Pedro Jimenez whiskeys, like the Glenmorangie, like NO, and others, you get accustomed to that particular that characteristic to it, right? Particularly when it combines with peat, it has a very distinctive and noticeable profile. That's what got me to identify the Glendronach. This time, it was more structure, slightly a little more higher ABV. It was the age notes. I don't know. Again, I don't know how old the AnCnoc is. If I had to guess, 8 years. I could be wrong. 7-8 years, somewhere in that ballpark. It doesn't seem youthful like the Wee Beastie. It's not that far extreme, and maybe it's just the way they've crafted it, the way the casking is done. They've covered it more, so it doesn't seem as youthful as a Lagavulin 8-year-old, but it could be other factors that they've gotten in production process to sort of mask the use of it. So anyway, so apologies for all the coughing, but it's only going to get worse. We're heading into allergy season. Drive down the roads and the trees are blooming and blossoming. The cherry trees, it's kind of pretty. The white and they get the pink and the sort of light purple colors and all that. But allergy season is come. Anyway, all right. So remember, who invented the whiskeys? It was the aliens. All right, so we're about a quarter after, a little bit longer than I had originally planned. Glad I eventually got the picture up there, right? So next time you're watching Ancient Alien Astronauts on the History Channel, you want to keep this in mind. It's amazing. That's one day I was to go. Do ancient alien astronauts think it could have been aliens? The ancient alien astronauts said yes. Is it it's possible? It could have been aliens. It's possible. When are they ever going to say no when it comes to ancient alien astronauts? Jack White, thank you much for tuning in. Again, hope you guys have a fantastic week. It's by a narrow margin, but I think age and a little bit of ABV was probably the deciding factor. That being said, if you can get your hands on a bottle of the Peatheart, you will not be disappointed. These are absolutely fantastic whiskeys. All right. I hope you have a fantastic week. And by the way, we will be back here next week, Friday, 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, 8 o'clock Eastern time. And Slangiava.